Bloody Johnny heard the faint metallic clang, muffled and muted, of the bolts being thrust into place. Then there ensued a tremendous silence. He sat down again on his creaking scout bed and surveyed King Mark's chamber. The tall candle, burning steadily and brightly now on the refectory table, and the red flames that were coming from a pair of wood on the earth, served to illuminate the vast shadowy expanse. The place was like the interior of an early Norman church, and it seemed to the mayor of Glastonbury that upon many of the enormous rafters above his head there was obscure patches and blotches of what must once have been painted scrolls. He walked to one of the arched windows and gazed out into the night. It was too dark to see more than the faintest outlines of the tree beneath him, but at one spot in the sky the wild-tossed racks of swift-blown clouds had thinned a little, revealing a dim moon that looked sick and giddy, as if she also, even she, were being blown like a great pale leaf before the devilish wind. The chamber was certainly clean. The Marquis had not deceived him on that point at any rate. He hesitated a moment or two, and then, quietly and deliberately, took off his coat, waistcoat, shirt, and trousers. He experienced, as he always did, a vague, humorous distaste for his plump, unathletic body, as he looked down upon his ungainly legs, encased in grotesque woolen drawers, and above his protruding belly, like the paunch of a figure upon a beer mug, in its soft, tight-fitting vest. He walked to the refectory table and took up a candle, placing it on the floor of his bedside. He went across to the chair where he had laid his clothes and took from his coat pocket a box of matches, which he placed on the floor by the side of the candle. Then, with heavy deliberation, he got down upon his knees by the side of that ridiculous little couch, draped in its ragged armorial coverlet, and shutting his eyes tight and letting his clasped hands rest on his stomach, which at that moment resembled the belly of a wooden punticello, he proceeded to murmur his usual evening prayer. This was a singular one, in that it was addressed to the air of the other side of his bed. "Master, be with me," prayed Bloody Johnny. "Master, be with me. Give me strength to change the whole course of human history upon earth. Give me strength to make Glastonbury the center of a completely new life. Master, be with me. Be with me now and forever, by thy most precious blood." The image he invoked in his imagination did not resemble in the least degree the tortured figure of pain worshipped by Sam Decker, and did not fade away till he got himself slowly into bed. He did this most carefully and gingerly, and through the little couch shivered and creaked lamentably under his weight, it did not let him down. His feet, however, protruded upon the coverlet like the feet of a corpse under a purple pall, almost 6 inches beyond the end of the bed. He then bent down, picked up the candle, blew it out, and replaced it upon the floor. He lay now flat upon his bed, on his broad back, his massive skull on the soft white pillow. With his hands he pulled up the heraldic coverlet till it was thickly disposed beneath his chin. He tucked it heavily, its heavy folds tight upon his shoulders, being totally unable to cope with the smooth compactness in which Mrs. Bellamy had so trimly turned back the sheet over the stiff blankets. His eyes watched the flickering firelight as it touched with warm, rosy reflections the huge dark rafters and the curved oaken supports of the baronial roof. A pleasant, aromatic smell, the smell of pine wood, began now to comfort his senses. The smoke was no longer bitter. It had become fragrant, soothing as incense, but more wholesome and natural, almost forest-like. "Master, be with me," his lips repeated. "Be with me now and forever by thy most precious blood." Mr. Guard's nature was above 10 times as thick as most men's. With the 7 or 8 under layers of this nature he was entirely absorbed, by day and by night, in his contact with Christ, which resembled, though it was not identical with, the physical embrace of an erotic obsession. Thus it was only now, when things had at least subsided and he was left alone, that the two of the three upper layers of his thick, phlegmatic nature became really conscious of the difference between going to bed in the chamber where Merlin turned King Mark into dust and going to bed with his faithful Megan. He recalled Lord P's malicious "he" as he was dragged off by his daughter, and the wild, frightening look, both for him and for the imaginary nest in the chimney with which Rachel had pulled him through the doorway. It was not with a very deep layer of his being, perhaps not even with the deepest of the two of the three uppermost ones, that he meditated for a little while upon the virginal provocativities of that soft, slim, girlish body that he had so nearly pulled down upon his knees just now. These sensual thoughts were entirely unresisted by Mr. Gurd. It was a peculiarity of Bloody Johnny's thick nature that his religious, and what many people might have called his spiritual feelings, had absolutely no connection with morality. But although not resisted, but rather on the other contrary encouraged by his conscious will, these amorous stirrings within him were so weak and so languid as very soon to subside into a delicious drowsiness. The mayor of Glastonbury's drowsiness, however, soon ceased to be delicious. No sooner had it become an actual sleep, a very light sleep, than a fatalistic, fantastic philological problem tormented the dreaming man. Was it Nanu or Dinimu that Owen Evans had told him was the original version of the popular Vivian? These three words, Nanu, Nimue, and Vivian, became for him now three flying herons with outstretched legs. Bloody Johnny's own heart, escaped somehow from his body, was the sick, giddy moon that he had caught a glimpse of. And it was this accursed philological problem, which heron was Merlin's paramour, that made this moon heart of his, as the wild wind tossed it about, so sick, so yellow, so dizzy. He suddenly awoke into full consciousness with a violent start. He had heard a voice. Oh, it was unmistakably real. It wasn't his dream at all. It wasn't his dream at all. Which cried out for beside him, the earth, from the earth, hearth. Nanu, Nanu! Not Nanu, Nanu, like in Mork and Ork. This is Nanu, N-I-N-E-U-E. N-I-E-U-E. He listened now, fully awake, and with a heart that was most assuredly safe back where it belonged, for it was pounding like a clock with a broken machinery. How the wind was howling! Now, never had he heard such a wind. It was a sheer, simple, childish terror that Markmoor Court was going to be blown down that night, which was making his heart beat in this way. Mr. Gurd kept telling himself just this. It's the wind, he repeated firmly and emphatically. It's the wind that's making my heart beat. I'm going to have to pause here for a second because I put something on the stove and I got to move it around. So don't go anywhere. All right, I'm back. Did you miss me? Now, where was I? All right. I'll read for a little longer than usual because of that. He cranked his neck round, staring at the fire that was now very large and very red. The voice he had heard was that of a man. It had come from somewhere behind the masonry of the wall, just to the right of the burning blaze. And then, without any ambiguity this time, he heard an unmistakable sound, clear and distinct, in some room just below his floor. He moved his head back upon his pillow. The sound ceased at once. Again he stretched out his hand, like the head of a saurian, over the side of the bed. The sound once more became audible. It was an unmistakable sound, but it was anything but a romantic sound. It was in fact the sound of a man making water. That means urinating. Mr. Gerd could not be mistaken. The man was making water into a metallic chamber pot, and as he made it, he broke wind several times. The mayor of Glastonbury continued to crane his neck over the side of his bed. He now became aware of a crack just in that place, between the bare, dark oak plants of the floor. A very faint light was observable through the slit in the floor. He continued to listen with his whole soul. Never had he listened so intently to any sound in his life. He heard the floor replace the chamber pot. He heard the man replace the chamber pot. It must have been made of thin tin or perhaps of iron. And then there were steps and gaspings and creakings and low grumbling groans. Soon he heard another sound similar to the first and yet dissimilar. A second human being was making water. This time the floor was noisier, quicker, sooner over. It's a woman, thought Bloody Johnny. He tried to make his awkward position as he hung over the crack of the floor a more comfortable one. He extended his arm until his fingers touched the floor. Yes, this gave a necessary support to his outstretched head. There were more shufflings and groanings, more creakings and obscure murmurs, than dead silence. He waited, still stretched out over the crack. He thought to himself, a man makes water, a woman makes water. These sounds are being heard all over Somersetshire tonight in thousands and thousands of bedrooms. Other unpleasant sounds are being heard too, the sounds of the teeth of incredibly ravenous rats inside hundreds of slaughterhouses. I wonder, so the thoughts of the mayor ran on, I wonder if there are any ears subtle enough to hear the worms at work in the churchyards. A man making water, a woman making water. Every sound a vibration. Every vibration a radiation, a detonation. Every sound traveling from the earth outward into space. Will the sound of Mr. and Mrs. Bellamy making water in this room at Mark Court go on voyaging through space until it reaches the Milky Way, and not stop even then? No, why should it stop then? Nothing once started can ever stop. Come back, perhaps, if space is round, but that's the best it can do. Here we go round Tom Tiddler's ground, the everlasting pissing of Mr. and Mrs. Bellamy. But the silence was broken again now. Broken just as the mayor of Glastonbury was going to withdraw his outstretched head. There was a sound of expectoration, and this sound was a good deal more disagreeable to the ears of Mr. Gerd than the other had been. And then he heard with appalling distinctness the voice of old woman saying to the old man, "Spit on the brown paper, John, spit on the brown paper I did lay out for ye." Yee. Bloody Johnny drew back his head and once more pulled the purple coverlet tightly around his chin. "Nanu," he murmured aloud, trying to recall what it had been in the intonation of that voice from behind the fireplace that had given his heart such a shock. Had he dreamed of his heart being sick and yellow like the driving moon before he heard that voice crying out? Yes, he had. He most assuredly had. And he had been dreaming of the name Nanu before he heard it cried. And he had thought of the words Nanu It had come suddenly into his head in place of something else. Before he had dreamed of it. Or had he dreamed of it? And thought of it too after he had heard that voice. Damn, said Bloody Johnny to himself, it must have been that old pantaloon down there talking to his wife, and in my dream I made it out to be a voice. He had reached this point in his cogitations when he suddenly found himself sitting straight up in the creaking little bed in a grievous fit of pure fear. He knew that voice was going to be lifted up again. He knew it was. Nothing had stopped it from being lifted up again. In just 1 second he would be hearing it again. It would be crying anew, just as it had been done before. If it does, he thought, I shall run out of the bridge. I shall knock at that girl's door. She couldn't not let me in. She couldn't not. But he clenched his hands together stubbornly and stared at the red fire, resolute in his massive way to beat down the sphere, to beat it down and hold it down so that it should not grow into panic, so that it should not get into his legs. So far it was only in his heart and in his throat, but he could feel it descending. It ran down a funnel. The fear funnel it was, that it ran down inside his ribs. No, between his spine and his stomach. Tightly he clasped his hands together, staring at the fire. He thought of various quiet, sturdy people in his life. He thought of Megan sleeping in their familiar room. And then in a flash he thought of Canon Crowe. The canon had been accustomed to read Rabelais to him sometimes of a night, when the servants were in bed. The canon had laughed at him at such times and called him Friar John de Saint-Amour, Friar John of the Funnels. He was all one great funnel now, waiting till the repetition of that voice pumped fear into him, out of him, through him, pumped. But all night yet, be will if that fear didn't get into his lungs. Now come a second of time when he actually wanted the voice to come again. When it comes, he thought. It's past then, come and gone. But it was his own mouth that now opened like a crack in thin ice. It was his own voice that resounded wildly through King Mark's chamber, till the rafters rang again. Nanu! Nanu! Not exactly, quote the Raven Nevermore, but he did feel a certain relief when he heard he had uttered this rending and tearing scream. He found he had sufficient self-control now to ask himself what it had been in the intonation of that voice that had made his heart so sick. The horror he had felt was not precisely fear. What it really was pity. It was pity carried to such a point by the intonation of that reiterated nanu, nanu, it became worse than fear. The relief he experienced when, impelled by a nervous force he was unable to resist, he had himself cried out that name was like the relief which some spectator of the Colosseum might have felt when, unable to endure what he saw, he had jumped down into the arena and was fighting there tooth and nail among the murderers and the murdered. He now found himself mumbling forth a sort of personal appeal to the being who had cried, Nanu, Nanu. Why don't you come forth? Why don't you show yourself? Yes, why don't you come forth now? Close up to my head. To my bed, near me, so that I can touch you, see you, feel you. Touch me, see me, feel me. Anyway, that's Glastonbury for today. I'm going to go get that thing that's in my oven. Till next time, cheers.